The first thing Queen Rosalind Ashcroft notices isn't the pain in her wrists, bound tight with rough hemp, but the smell. It is a thick, oily, cloying scent, the specific stench of centuries-old oak timber dissolving into charcoal. It is the year 870 AD, late winter. The location is East Anglia. Rosalind, the acrid smoke stinging her eyes, blurring the silhouette of the man standing over her. He is not a monster from a nursery rhyme. He is frighteningly human. He is wiping a mixture of soot and dried blood from a bearded axe with a piece of fine silk, her silk, torn from the tapestry that once hung above her husband's throne. Outside, the sounds of slaughter have dulled to a rhythmic, miserable thrum. The screaming has stopped, replaced by the crackle of the fire eating her great hall, and the low, guttural commands of men, speaking a tongue that sounds like stones grinding together. Old Norse. She looks down at her dress. The embroidery, gold thread on crimson wool, is splattered with mud. She tries to stand, to assert the dignity of her station, but a heavy boot pushes her back into the mire. The Viking warrior doesn't even look at her face. He looks at her hands, then her teeth, then her hips. He is not looking at a queen. He is looking at livestock. At this moment, the terror is not about death. Death would be a release, a swift journey to God. The terror is the realization that to these men, she has ceased to be a person. She has become Varninga cargo. To understand the hell Rosalind is about to enter, we must strip away the Victorian romanticism of the Vikings. We must look past the sagas of glory and look at the ledger. Rosalind is a fictional composite, but her situation was the terrified reality for thousands of high-ranking women across Anglo-Saxon England during the invasion of the Great Heathen Army, circa 865 to 878 AD. While popular history focuses on the looting of monasteries, the theft of chalices and crosses, the true economic engine of the Viking Age was not gold. It was human flesh. By the late 9th century, the Norse had established a sophisticated industrial-scale network of human trafficking. This was the institution of thraldom. In Norse society, the distinction was sharp. You were either jarl, noble, carl, free peasant, or thrall, slave. Under the gragas, grey goose laws, written down later but reflecting these oral traditions, a thrall had no legal rights. They were not human in the eyes of the law. They were property, legally indistinguishable from cattle or sheep. When a kingdom fell, like Northumbria or East Anglia, the men of fighting age were often slaughtered to prevent rebellion. But the women, particularly young and healthy women of status like our Rosalind, were a distinct form of currency. This wasn't random cruelty, it was macroeconomics. The Vikings were the middlemen in a global trade route that stretched from Dublin, the greatest slave market in the West, all the way to the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. In the markets of the East, a healthy, high-status European woman could fetch a price in silver dirhams that would sustain a Viking crew for a year. Rosalind is not being taken merely to serve in a farmhouse. She is being liquidated as an asset. The antagonist of this story is not a single warlord, like Ivar the Boneless or Guthrum. The true villain is the slave trader. Let us examine the cold, rational calculus of the captor. To the Viking raider, a high-born woman presented a unique logistical challenge and opportunity. Unlike a gold chalice, she requires food, water, and guarding. She is a depreciating asset if damaged, but an appreciating one if moved to the right market. This economic reality created a system of calculated dehumanization. The raiders had to break the will of these women immediately. A defiant thrall is dangerous. A broken thrall is compliant. The process often began with the stripping of symbols. The jewelry, the keys to the pantry, a symbol of female authority in Anglo-Saxon culture, and the fine outer garments were taken. But the most calculated cruelty was the erasure of identity. Upon entering the system of thraldom, women were often renamed. Their Christian names, bound to their lineage and their god, were stripped away. They were given derogatory Norse descriptors or simple functional names. Rosalind, a name signifying gentle horse or tender protection, might simply become kraka, crow, or ambat, female slave. The Viking slave master did not view this as evil. In his worldview, fate, weird, had spoken. If the Norns had spun you a life of servitude, resisting it was futile. This fatalism allowed them to commit atrocities with a clean conscience. They were simply the reapers of a harvest they believed the gods had sanctioned. We must now pull back the sanitized veneer of history books that speak of assimilation and intermarriage. For a woman like Rosalind, the reality was often a slow, suffocating erasure of the self that was indeed worse than the clean death of the sword. If she was not sold to the East, she was taken to the Danelaw or back to Scandinavia. Here, the wives of defeated enemies were forced into a role that combined hard labor with sexual servitude. The primary fate of female thralls was the production of textiles. The Viking Age was powered by sails, and sails are made of wool. It took longer to produce the wool for a sail than to build the ship itself. Women were locked in weaving houses for 12 to 14 hours a day, breathing in lanolin and dust, their fingers bleeding from the loom, producing the very cloth that would carry their captors to new lands to enslave more of their kin. But the domestic reality was darker. In Norse society, polygyny was practiced, though usually only by the wealthy. A man had a wife, Eiginkona, who held keys and legal status, but he could have any number of frille, concubines, or female thralls. For a captured noblewoman, this was the ultimate inversion of her world. She was forced to live in the same longhouse as the legitimate wife of the man who burned her home. She was forced to serve them food, to empty their chamber pots, and, at night, to endure the bed of the master. The legal codes were explicit. A child born to a thrall woman was a thrall. The slavery was hereditary. Rosalind would be forced to bear children who would grow up speaking the language of her destroyers, worshipping their gods, Odin and Thor, and perhaps eventually raiding her own former people. She would witness the biological erasure of her own culture through her offspring. There is archaeological evidence suggesting this wasn't rare. Genetic studies of Iceland reveal a staggering asymmetry. While the majority of male settlers were Norse, the majority of female settlers were Gaelic or from the British Isles. These were not willing brides. They were the spoils of war, taken from Ireland and Scotland, forced into the hulls of longships and carried to the edge of the known world to populate a new colony. Let us return to Rosalind, 1 year later. She is in York, Jorvik. The smoke of the burning hall is a distant memory, replaced by the smell of fish and wet wool. She is no longer a queen. She is a nameless weaver in a workshop near the river Ouse. She has not been beaten in months. She is fed. In the eyes of the Viking economy, she is a well-maintained tool. But looking into her eyes, you see the worse than death. It is the silence. She has no one to speak her dialect with. She has no one to call her by her true name. She has learned to lower her head when a free man walks by. The vibrant, intelligent woman who once advised a king on matters of state has been crushed into a vessel of silent obedience. The worse than death was not the physical torture. It was the total starvation of the soul. It was the knowledge that she was alive, breathing and working, but she, Rosalind, had ceased to exist. She was a ghost haunting her own life.
This dark chapter of history is not just a story of the past. It is written in the blood of the present. The genetic legacy of the British Isles, Iceland and the Faroe Islands bears the silent markers of these women. Their mitochondrial DNA is a testament to survival against impossible odds. They endured the unendurable. They were the weavers who made the sails, the mothers who bore the next generation, the silent spines of the Viking expansion. We must remember them, not just as victims, but as the unwilling architects of the world we know today. Their suffering was the mortar in the foundations of the medieval North. If you want to support high-quality, deep-dive history that refuses to look away from the gritty truth, please click the subscribe button and ring the bell. It directly supports our research.
And if you are fascinated by the hidden lives of the Viking Age, you need to watch this video next, where we uncover the brutal reality of what happened to the men who surrendered. History is often written by the victors, but the DNA tells the story of the survivors. Click here to subscribe, and click here to watch The Fate of the Viking Thrall. See you in the next one.